Hi guys, welcome back to another episode on Rancor Exotics, and today we're going to be talking about the Abronia or the Mexican alligator lizard. Now, there are alligator lizards in the United States. We're going to be talking about the Mexican alligator lizard. They look very different from each other, and they also tend to have different habitats as well. Now, the Mexican alligator lizards are originally found on a mountain range down in South Mexico, and these guys look absolutely stunning. They range from a dull green to a bright green to a blue. They're very dimorphic. They're very beautiful. They're intelligent for such a small lizard. They have a prehensile tail, which adds to their character. These guys are an absolute treat to really take care of. I've had the pleasure of visiting several shops that breed these guys. So it's really interesting to see how they take care of these guys, and how rewarding it is to see when a new litter of these lizards are made. Now, Abronias are endangered in their natural state. So down in Mexico, you need to have permits to have these guys, and there is an issue with smuggling. They're, of course, captive bred individuals in the States, and I strongly urge you to buy a captive bred individual because simply they're much hardier. They don't have to get beat up when they're imported. So if you're going to buy a Abronia, please make sure that the person you're buying from is a breeder, or whoever the person you're buying from source this from a responsible place, because Abronias are very beautiful and they are very intelligent. However, they are endangered simply because of the pet trade. It's a hard thing to say, but that's the truth. And I want to make sure that if you are interested in buying one because of this video, or you want to look into one a little more, to please make sure that your source where you're going to purchase one is from a responsible place. Alright, now that the grid is out of the way, let's talk about what you will need before you buy one of these guys. And you do want to make sure that the tank that your setup is set up for these guys before you even buy one. These species of lizards are very picky with their care, and there's a little bit of wiggle room. However, I liken the care of these guys to be very much on the same level as, say, chameleons, simply because these guys want high humidity. They want good airflow, and we're going to be talking about that a little more. So just note that your setup is going to have to reflect this quite a bit. Now, for an individual Abronia, the minimum, and I say minimum here, is a 24-inch by 24-inch by 36-inch high enclosure. Now, if you want to get a larger enclosure, because this 24 by 24 by 36 will house an adult, of course, it is always better to have a larger enclosure simply because it offers more options. Of course, if you're going to buy a larger enclosure, I strongly urge you to buy an enclosure that is a little higher, because these are an arboreal species and they don't use the ground floor too much. They will love to have more vertical space than not. Now, for this species, it's often touted on the internet that you need to have a screen enclosure, and I would say yes, that a screen enclosure is probably a good bet for this species. If you live in an ideal area in the world, these guys like high humidity and low temperatures. I'll get into the specifics of that in a little bit. However, for your setup, you can either buy a glass tank, which you'll need different things, and then or you can get a mesh tank. These mesh tanks are often bought for chameleons because they also need very good airflow. If you buy a mesh a mesh enclosure, then if you live in a part of the world where you have high humidity and cool temperatures, you might even be able to place these guys outside. Of course, you have to be very careful, because a couple of the people I was talking to say that there was an incident where a wild cat actually got into 3 or 4 of their Abronia enclosures and ripped them up, and the Abronias managed to escape. So if you're going to have these animals outside, please make sure that you've taken proper precautions, that the animal safety is guaranteed, and there's not a chance for these animals to get out. Because though many animals have the capability of becoming invasive, Abronias just don't seem very capable of that. Though they breed maybe on a breeder, the probably safe bet would be breeding about once a year. They don't their young they're not very robust, so I don't think these guys would be invasive. I would be more scared that these guys would probably perish, so be very careful with that. Now, you can also buy a glass enclosure, but you're going to need extra stuff for this particular type of setup, because since it's glass, it's going to prevent airflow. So you're going to want a couple of items with this type of enclosure, and a particular type of top to help. Now, these guys are found in Mexico. They are found in the mountain range. So these guys want a humidity of around 80%, and they're cool, and their temperatures to be around 70 to 79. So from 70s to 80 degrees, 10 degrees of margin of error, I would say. So I'd say keep these guys at an ambient 75 with a hot spot of around 80 to 82. That would probably be the best bet. I say you really don't need much of a basking spot. Probably a very low wattage infrared would probably help. Now, these guys are found in the canopy of trees. Since they're arboreal, so these guys are exposed to quite a bit of light. Though people, it's really debated whether you need UVB or not. I strongly believe that you should, and I strongly believe that the UVB, and you should have some other type of bulb that emulates natural light as well, because I do think these guys would do a little better in a bioactive enclosure with live plants and live bromeliads as well. Bromeliads are probably one of the things they live next to in the wild, since bromeliads do provide a small microclimate of moisture, and these guys, liking moisture in the high 80s, really would like to have some bromeliads as an option in case you forget to mist your enclosure. Of course, I'm going to be talking about misting and husbandry in a little bit. However, bromeliads and live bioactives would be things I recommend for this. Now, these guys, for your setup, if you want to get a glass aquarium for these guys, because since the humidity is such a sticking point, a glass will help keep the humidity in. However, you will also need ventilation, because this species really does not like stagnant air at all. Several of the breeders I talked to said they suffer from fungal infections if they're left with stagnant air for too long. So if you're planning on buying a Exoterra tall enclosure, I've seen they recommend that getting like a computer fan on a very low setting that gives a gentle breeze and putting up on top of the Exoterra, because the Exoterras do have screen tops. Having that on at a low level throughout the day will air it out, and with bi-daily mistings, once in the morning and once probably in the evening, will help keep the humidity high enough. Now you can also get a hydrometer to make sure that the humidity is where it needs to be. However, frequent misting is still needed because these guys do lap up water from the water droplets. They rarely drink from a water dish, which is a reason why bromeliads will still kind of help, because bromeliads retain water in between their leaves. Now, for the choice of substrate, people say sphagnum moss or different types of mosses that help retain moisture, and you'll probably choose I would choose sphagnum moss as the best bet, since this stuff doesn't really decay, and it helps maintain humidity. Now you can have bioactive soils. You just want to make sure that it is that it does not become waterlogged with your frequent mistings, and that's why the fan's so important, to help air that tank out. These guys tend to bury a little bit in case they do want a higher humidity. Sometimes you might dig, so that kind of hints you as a caretaker to be up to date with your mistings. And this is a reason why I'm really pushing that this species is for an experienced reptile keeper, probably somebody that has kept chameleons before. Now, for the husbandry, these guys, they don't need any special type of diet. They're insectivores. If you have a proper dish for them, they'll eat mealworms, hornworms, roaches, crickets, locusts. They're really not very picky on what they eat. However, these guys, or the prey items, I do believe need to be gut loaded. The prey items need to be fed, veggies and other nutritious vegetables before they are fed off, to maximize their nutritional value for your Abronia. And on top of that, I believe a daily powder of calcium and D3 would really help this species. Now, since you are going to be providing UVB for these guys, you might not want to dose high amounts of D3. However, it's always a good idea to dose some, because you never know if your light is giving off enough rays for this species. Misting is important for this species. These guys need it humid, not waterlogged, but they do need it humid. Including a lot of moss might help retain more moisture. Having a glass enclosures with proper ventilation will help. If you have a screen type enclosure, you got to make sure you're up to your mistings, because these guys do not like it dry at all. Now handling. These guys are small, and they're squirmy. I've held one before, and it was not used to people, and it squirmed, and it was it wasn't a baby, it was a juvenile, and it was fairly small, and I got sausage man hands. So you want to make sure that if you are going to pick up a younger Abronia, that you don't pick it up roughly. This is definitely not a species to hand to a child. They do bite, though they don't bite very hard. They do bite, and it might startle you, and you might end up accidentally hurting your Abronia. So you got to be looking out for that as well. So this species is not really much to want to handle, but one to watch, because these guys are very inquisitive. When it's time for feeding, they're not shy at all. They come out like ravenous little tree raptors, and they do eat, but handling is probably not a thing you should do. Now, cohabitation can be done between adults, a male, and maybe a female or two. Now, if you are new to Abronias, you want to make sure that you have 2 enclosures ready for your male and female, and you want to make sure that they don't fight. These guys, they're pretty much solitary. They only get together to breed, and then they split up. these guys might fight it out. So you want to make sure that there is no issues when you introduce your male to your female. And again, it's probably going to be the male that's going to be the bully. So you got to make sure your female is in proper shape, she has good appetite, and she has good weight. Now, people leave their male and females together. If you are new to Abronias, I highly recommend that after you introduce the male for a week and the male does his job and you see them together, locked, I would separate them. Not when they're locked, but you know, when they separate and the male's about doing his own thing, to separate them, give them their own space. Feed both of them, make sure there wasn't any injuries on any of them. Be very cautious. Cohabitation is often risky. Most people just do it because they want to save space. However, if you feel like your male and female have been introduced enough and there has been no issue, you can try to keeping them together on the longer term. I've seen experienced breeders keep their males and females permanently, and the female's not overly stressed by the male, and that's perfect. However, again, you want experience before you put these individuals together for the long term. Now, breeding. These guys need to be around 2.5 years old for them to breed. Again, they both need to be having good appetites. They both have to have good weights. 2.5 years old. You got to be careful with how aggressive the male is to the female, or the female being counter-aggressive to the male. You need to be very watchful with that. Now, for incubation, let's say you were breeding and you successfully bred them, you will not find any eggs. These guys lay live litters, so you don't have to worry about incubation, which is pretty great. Now, the litters range. My breeder that I've talked to that lives nearby says that he gets around 4 or 5 babies per litter. There's others that say they get more. However, in many cases, the litter size really doesn't matter. You just got to make sure that the male and female are both healthy, and you won't have to have an incubator ready for these guys. Now, for the availability of this species, again, please do not buy wild caught. These guys are endangered. They're very beautiful, and we want to make sure as a community that wherever these guys came from have a beautiful, thriving population, because it's really bad on us to say that this particular animal were to go, say, extinct because of the pet trade. There's other species like the electric blue day gecko that is running into this issue, where the pet trade just is dwindling at their numbers. We have captive bred individuals now. They're healthy. They're more robust than imports. So please buy a captive bred individual. Now, these animals are still not common, as you can probably tell. You won't find them at pet stores, and you probably won't find them at reptile expos. You'll probably have better luck finding them online, looking at breeders for them. There's several of them on Fauna Classifieds. They do come up quite a bit on Morph Market as well. You want to verify that these guys did came from the breeder, that they have pictures of the male and female that produced them, because again, this will help you kind of see what their parents look like and help you know what the baby's gonna look like when it grows up, or what the baby's is gonna look like. So you got to make sure that wherever you source this animal from is sourced responsibly and from well-intentioned hands. Now, these guys are not cheap. If someone's trying to get rid of their pet, they'll probably run for a couple $100s, and I've seen subspecies of Abronia go up to $800 to $900 per individual. So it ranges. I believe that more money should be invested into the enclosure than the actual animal. So it's going to be, the enclosure is going to run you several hundreds of dollars for a good Exoterra, or if you want to get a mesh enclosure, that's fine too. However, you want to make sure that the enclosure is well suited for the animal. It's well established. If you're going bioactive, which I think you should, that the cleanup crew is well established with isopods. Make sure that this setup is well set up for your animal. Throughout my my spewing of facts, you probably can already infer several cons from this animal, and that this is an expensive animal to set up, and it's an expensive animal to buy. This is not no $40 ball python and corn snake. This is for, like I said, an experienced breeder or experienced pet keeper that knows what they're getting, into. You got to be very strict with your misting regiments, and that's very much it. You have to have daily care for this animal. Now, I've went over this a little bit. These guys are prone to fungal infections and other infections if kept outside. Fungal infections come from stagnant air. Please make sure that they have proper airflow. Install fans. They don't have to be very strong at all. They just need a very gentle breeze to move around the stagnant air. And you'll probably want a good misting system for a mesh enclosure, since this mesh enclosure won't help keep in the humidity but will eliminate the airflow. So it's one or the other. Of course, I'm siding more towards a glass enclosure, because a dried out lizard will probably has a higher chance of dying. A lizard that's been exposed to stagnant air has a better chance of recuperating. After all, fungal infections or scale rot can probably be remedied with some antibacterial creams and a visit to the veterinarian to make sure that's the proper proper course of action for the animal. And lastly, the Abronia's biggest downfall, I think, is the size. These guys are pretty small. Now, adults are obviously much larger, much handleable. However, if you don't handle the Abronias while they're smaller, they probably aren't going to be very used to you, and their bites are going to be much harder. They're going to be much more unruly. So it's really a species that you want to make sure is comfortable in the enclosure first. If you're going to hold, make sure that you feed with tongues so they're used to you and they don't run off on you, much like you would with like Reptiliatus with his tokay geckos. You want to make sure that you don't hurt these guys. These guys are pretty small, pretty delicate. However, they're more than make up for it with their beauty and personalities. Now, to summarize, please buy this animal captive bred. This animal is very beautiful, small, intelligent, and fragile. It's endangered where it comes from, so you want to make sure that if you do get one, you understand that this is a weight that you do have to take care of. This isn't a leopard gecko that if it dies, you can just put in the compost bin. As hard as that is for me to say. However, these lizards are absolutely beautiful. Their scales are beautiful. They look like an artisan took their time with every scale. If they get used to you, I've had the pleasure of holding several adults that were broken in by their breeder through slow and tedious care of handling, where he held them inside the tank so they weren't too scared and they could retreat whenever they wanted to. So these guys were a treat to hold. The prehensile tail really does add something to them. Really nice animals. So Abronias overall, I think, are a great species to have, though of course they demand a little more room, a tall tank. However, I think they more than make up for their need of space with their beautiful personalities. These guys are very much a needy species. They do need daily attention, but I believe that if you do keep one of these guys, it will be a treat walking up to the tank and seeing them every day. So Abronias, I think, are great for experienced keepers. If you're trying to get one, I highly believe that you need to be get something else that has that's a little more resilient. Maybe buy a false chameleon, false Cuban false. Was it Cuban false chameleon? I think is what they're called. Gosh, those guys will probably have the same type of setup and tolerate more of a beating than these guys, and it will give you great experience to get into them. Now, I'd like to thank you guys for watching the video. That's the end of it, of my fact spiel. This is more of a care overview. I highly encourage you guys to not just watch this video, but please go out on the internet and cross-reference whatever I said. Look up more facts, look up more videos. There's tons of care on these guys. Be very successful studying these guys, because this species is a treat to look at and hold, but it's also more of a treat to study and really get to the nitty-gritty of where they came from and why they're so special. All right guys, thank you for your time and have a good day. I'll see you guys in the next one.